Pom and I, what's going on, mate?
Hey, mate, how we doing? You right?
No, we're great. We're great. This is an emergency trade update for the fans because we have a situation which is different to what we have had over the last few years. So, what we're going to do today is you've really you pointed this out to me the other night. I think this is important for us to know exactly what could happen and what needs to happen this season for us to add the players that we all want to add. So why don't you take the floor and I'll just ask questions as I go.
Okay, so as we stand today on the 25th of September, if we look at the top right here, so I will share the screen. So if we look at the top right here, we've got our list as it stands today. So it works out at 35 players and 5 on the rookie list. And as you can see in this column here, these are the people that we've already jettisoned out of the club. So we've had 2 retirees and 4 delistings. And it takes us down to 35 on the senior list and still 5 on the rookie list, including our category Bs in OEs and players of that ilk. So with the AFL's announcement of cuts next year, in June, they suggested it was 35 now on the senior list, and they were going to keep 4 rookies. As it stands at the moment, that will have to change because teams like Brisbane, Richmond and Gold Coast, they've actually signed over that. And Gillian has delayed the announcement, much to the chagrin of Hawthorn. Alistair Clarkson's been quite vocal about this. Why don't we know the list now? Now, we can assume it's going to be around the 38 mark to 40, according to reports. That's what a lot of the journalists are going with. So what I've done is had a look at potential delistings, knowing that we're going to be recruiting people to keep that list around that mark. So on this next column here, these are all the people that are out of contract that we can probably assume may get delisted. And I've gone worst case scenario, delisting as many people so we can fill that void as possible.
So before you get to this point, with the retirees and the delistings that we've already made, how many do we have total?
So we have 40 in total on the list as it stands. That's made up of 35 senior players and 5 on the rookie list.
Gotcha.
So obviously it's quite warped because we've got Charlie Kerner on the long-term injury. We've got Kemp. So obviously our list is quite bigger than a normal AFL list because we've used that methodology as well.
Yep.
So if we delisted these players here, as you can see, Callum Moore, Cam Paulson, Owies, Phillips, I don't think many people would complain. That's 5 people off the list. There's 3 rookies there and 2 senior players. And you'd presume Setterfield, Williamson, Kennedy and Nunes, based on their 2020, would be players of interest, particularly Jack Nunes. With 170 games, it keeps our games. And that would look something like this. We would have 33 players on the senior list and the rookie list would be 2. So that's 35 in total. And this is where the problem comes in. The AFL rules are quite stringent on draft picks. So at the moment, we've elevated Gibbons, and you have to take a minimum of 3 picks in the draft, excluding rookie elevations.
Right.
So Gibbons has been elevated, which would mean that we'd have to take 2 picks, plus we've got Zach Williams. That would take our total of players to 36. But if you look at what Carlton are looking at, we've been linked with multiple backmen, multiple midfielders, and I think we'd all agree we probably need a small forward. So as you can see here, that would give us potentially 8 ins. 8 plus 33 is 41, which would take us over 1 over what most people think will be the maximum the AFL will allow this year, which is a list of 40 senior players.
So one of 2 things. What do we do? Does that mean we're going to have to lose someone, or does that mean we're going to have to not go and recruit one of these midfielders or whatnot and just hope that our development stocks that we've got at the moment can turn into what we need?
Well, it's a great question. I think you've got 2 avenues to go down. I think if Carlton have been linked, and by the looks of it, it looks like Nick Austin is actively recruiting players that we need. So every player we're linked with is high in pressure acts, who's a midfielder. everyone's got very good disposal efficiency, which I think as fans, everyone is on the same page. I think I think Carlton will be going for senior players this year. I think them draft picks will have to be used, 2 of them, purely to meet the criteria. But I would suggest that Carlton are looking to heavily recruit. So you would say that the money bounded around on Zach Williams, we know we're 105% of our salary cap at the moment. You would say that you're probably going to look at 1 or 2 trades internally to try and fit that, particularly if it's 38, which is the worst case scenario, but that is Gillian has dropped 38 being a figure. If it does go to a 38 restriction, 2 players are going to have to leave off our books to make these ins feasible.
So
definitely.
There's no issue if we continue the list sizes as they are in 2020 in terms of being 44. It'd be just a normal year, right?
Well, if it was the 44, we'd be laughing because of all the players that we have out of contract. We would actually be going into this trade period knowing that we can over-recruit. If anything, you'd probably be asking the question, how can we fill the list?
Yep.
And you'd probably be looking at kind of a scenario like St Kilda did last year, where they'd go hard at 4 or 5 senior players and then have a bit of potluck like Jack Bytel in the pick 30s, just throwing a few darts at some smaller players later in the draft. But it does look like they are cutting the list. That looks like something that AFL are really pushing hard at the moment to limit that list, to limit it in a way that's going to be financially viable because they have taken a huge hit in 2020.
So where is the value?
Well, that's a good question. Obviously, if you look at someone like St Kilda and Richmond, who have had very successful trade periods and delistings, then gone very well the next year. So if you look at Richmond 16, you look at St Kilda last year, they've usually jettisoned a player who's that mid-age senior player. So Delelio for Richmond, that ended up becoming Josh Caddy, Prestia, and Nankervis. You look at last year, St Kilda, they got rid of Josh Bruce, much to the chagrin of their fans and media. Many said that was a bad trade strategy, but that did become Zach Jones and Dan Butler. So you can see they're 2 key players to St Kilda. So you're usually looking at a senior player. Now, if we organise these guys by seniority and we go down to where you'd probably look to trade a player, and that's your 27s and overs, you can see here, aside from Liam Jones, there isn't really much value to a team. You'd say Mark Murphy at 33 is too old and won't command much internally. Levi Casbolt, you could throw an argument he might possess a bit of a value to someone like, say, who's desperate for a key forward with a bit of senior notoriety about him. But there isn't something there that says first rounder. And I'd say it's a tough sell. If you look at them players there, it's a hard sell to a football club to take a risk on.
Yep.
And also Ed Kerno, Liam Jones, we don't really have the replacements at the moment internally to let these guys go as well. They're very key pivotal players to our system.
Right.
So then you'd probably look at this mid-age. So if we go to the 23s and over, and you'd say 2 players that really strike out are Patrick Cripps and Harry Mackay. So both of these players have been important to Carlton. I couldn't see for the life of me trading Cripps. And we know Harry has been in the papers. We know we had that Instagram gate, I'm calling it. He changed his profile picture to a light blue and followed north. Now, I think Harry is an intriguing one there in that list because bold wins flags. Now, I'm not suggesting we trade him, but I would say if I look at that list, your Jacob Wheaterins of this world, they're untouchable. They are the future. Patrick Cripps, untouchable. He's captain. Sam Doherty, same boat. The rest there are heavy project players, and I'd include Charlie Kerno in that. It's a big risk for a club to take him on with his knees, and that's going to depreciate his value. Like if he was playing, you'd lock him in as a first rounder. But I would say our key position forwards is where we have a plethora of talent. If you look at our list, we have a lot of key forwards. You've got your Casbolts, you've got your McGoverns, you've got your Kernos and your Mackays, and they don't all fit into that role. They can't all play at once. So I would say if I was Nick Austin, if I was looking for trade value, I was looking to get a second first rounder. I was looking to go hard at, say, your Clayton Olivers we've been linked with, your Kellys. These guys are going to command 2 first rounders. It's a good chunk off the salary cap, and it's a bold risk, and that's where your value is. It's a lot easier to sell one player than 3 or 4 of them players. 3 or 4 of them players you could trade, but you ain't going to get big value for.
I guess also the thing is, you know, it's hard to know as a fan whose idea was it at the beginning to play the 3 tall forward system, because we obviously got McGovern into the club before David Teague was the coach. So I'm assuming it might have been a Silvani, Bolton, and I guess it might have been a David Teague thing as well, because he was the forwards coach. But if it was a Silvani decision, like this is how the list is going to be shaped, if Austin's now come in, it makes me wonder, is he going to want to do the same thing with the list? And if he doesn't, well, then I think that's when this conversation comes to light, because it looks like they might be willing to part with one of these forwards.
Well, 100%. And if you look where Nick Austin's come from, the Doggies, they've always played a real tall forward. So Norton this year has been their primary target when he's fit. And Bruce has kind of played that Levi Casbolt role. He's been in the ruck. He's been kind of the second backup. And what they've done is they've rotated their taller mids through that area as a third target. So Bontempelli, much to the shock of everyone, has been named in the All-Australian forward line. The reason that is because he's played forward time. He's played a lot of forward time. They just deploy a third tall, a bit like Richmond do with Josh Caddy, and that's been very successful. Their third target has come from the midfield. Their taller, bigger-bodied midfielder goes in there to kind of change the game up. If you look at Brisbane, they often do that. They rotate someone through that forward line as well. You know, Zorko goes forward or Neil rests there. They look to have some impactful player to change it up. So you could make an argument that Mitch McGovern has played his better football when he's been one of the top 2 forwards, when one of our key forwards has been injured and he's had a bit more of a primary role. So for me, I would be saying, as much as I hate to say it, because I think Harry is potentially a great player, I look at the way that Carlton are trying to play. They're trying to play a fast entry inside 50. They don't often isolate their tall targets. They're kind of just literally roaming around the forward line. You could make an argument that the strategy of our club would look better without 3 predominant talls and go 2 talls and a third. Maybe that's a Jesus, maybe that's a Patrick Cripps. We have been rotating him in the forward heavily towards the end of the year. And you might see the value there. If you could get a pick, a top 10 pick from North, a first rounder, would you do it? Because we have got the depth in talent. And would you back Kerno in? Because for me, Kerno suits this forward structure a lot better than Harry does. Harry has to be isolated. Kerno, we know, can play on the ground, can make magic happen out of nothing. He's a very similar forward to the top forwards in the comp. You look at Tom Hawkins, he roams. Kerno does that as well. That's Kerno's strength. He roams around, makes magic happen. So it would be a bold strategy, and bold strategies win your flags.
Yep. I guess the question is, you know, do you trust that Harry's going to be, do you trust that Charlie's going to become healthy? Could you make a move like that potentially without knowing what Charlie's going to be doing next year? I think, mate, this is a good conversation. I think what it's done is, for me anyway, when you came to me and explained it to me, made me realise, well, you know, I think we need to do we? That's the question. Do we need to start getting used to a change of strategy? Because we've gone to the draft heavily over the last, you know, X amount of years. Whereas now, are we going to start, is this going to be the beginning of the, you know, the factory? You know, the GWS Giants were the same. They had bulk draft picks over the course of that, you know, after that 3rd or 4th year. They started becoming, I guess, a a business and a factory, you know, one in, one out. It's interesting. I don't know how that's going to go for our boys. I mean, Harry, I mean, I get your notion. I mean, I wouldn't want to lose Harry, but at the same time, I get the notion of you've got to make a bold move to, you know, to sort of, there's got to be a circuit breaker to rise up to the very top. So interesting, mate. It's a watch this space.
It is 100%. It's a watch this space, because I think you've always got to ask yourself, losing Harry would break all of our hearts. I don't think anyone's suggesting do it as a primary. But if the lists are cut, I think as a list manager, you'd be looking where's the value. And like Lockie O'Brien and Paddy Dow, 2 players that fans have said maybe we potentially trade them. You think that's going to be a lot tougher sell, and you're going to waste a lot of time negotiating that, versus say if North are interested in Harry and they've got picks to burn. And that is the kind of question you ask. If you can convert a Harry into Clayton Oliver, and that would maybe take a week, would you do it versus a tough sell of Lockie O'Brien and Dow, maybe a second and a third, and then having to on-trade that pick to get the necessary resources to go after a Clayton Oliver? Could take you 2 or 3 weeks of a trade period. And we know what's happened with Carlton in the past. When we delay, we lose these players.
Yep. Well, mate, this has been great. Thanks so much for sharing. I'm sure those watching will get something from it, and probably gives us something to be prepared for this trade period. I mean, I guess more so to the point of we're not really going to get 4, 5, 6 players in that we want to bring in as winners if we don't lose a couple. I think that's what it looks like. So fantastic job. I love how you've got different graphs here. I'm sure there'll be more to come. And mate, let's chat soon.
Cheers, guys. Thank you very much.